Hola, Alicante. Soon we'll be able to have lunch. So, my name is ERIK Rasmussen. I've been here a few times before, and I'm here today to talk to you about what you can do with React that isn't just the DOM. So when we first, what even does that mean? So when we first get started with React, we all know, you have to install these two dependencies in your package.json. This is only since 2005, by the way, before they were all in one project, and before they realized at Facebook, hey, these are actually two separate concerns here. But most junior React developers might not understand why we need these two separate imports. So let me explain the difference. React is the core library that provides the fundamental API for building UI components. It provides the component logic. It manages the component state, the lifecycle methods, and hooks. And it also contains the reconciliation algorithm that determines how updates should be applied to the UI, like which bits to re-render. And it is platform agnostic. It can be used with lots of different renderers. React DOM is the most common one, but we've got React Native for things like Expo, like we saw earlier today. And it also handles JSX. It converts JSX into JavaScript functions, but it does not dictate how they are rendered. React DOM, on the other hand, is the web-specific renderer. It renders React components to the actual browser DOM. And it also contains a virtual DOM, so it doesn't actually render directly to the DOM. It first renders to a representation of the DOM in memory, and then does a diffing algorithm to determine what actually to render, because the DOM is super slow. And it does all of that DOM manipulation of mounting and unmounting components in the DOM. It also, this was a really important thing back, 11 years ago when React came out. It normalizes all of the different browser events, because browsers are a lot better now, but before, the different events that came out of the browser worked differently. So that's really useful. And it also does the hydration and server-side rendering. So not only does it render to DOM, but it can also render to a string on the server, and then rehydrate on the browser. And hydration means making all of the components interactive, reconnecting all of the handlers and things. So the power of React, what I want to get across to you today, comes from the fact that if you've built anything in React, and I assume you have, once you know how to do this bit, you actually have more powers than you think. You know how to create a declarative UI that changes over time, and with that, you can render to many different things. So, things like what? Well, there's the React DOM, of course, and React Native is the other one that most people know. There once was a thing called React 360 that was for doing VR stuff. Clearly, Meta still cares about VR, so they must have something internal, but they're not maintaining this anymore. There's React 3 Fiber for rendering to 3JS. There's React Native Web, which lets you render React Native components to the DOM, the dream being to share the exact same components between your mobile app and your web app. There's one of my favorites, React PDF. So I have no idea how the internals of a PDF is structured, but with this library, it gives me these components that I can then put together, and and reading the docs, I can lay out a PDF. In my career, I've built invoices and things with that. And then there's another favorite of mine called Ink, the only one that doesn't start with React for some reason. It lets you build UI in the CLI. Again, I have no idea how to draw things in the CLI, but with Ink, I can. And, maybe something you might want to build. Like, what could you possibly build? So for the purposes of this talk, I wanted to learn more about how the React rendering system happens. So I came up with a project to, what can I take that's JSX shaped and render it to something that I can easily see if it's correct or not. And I came up with a thing that no one wants and no one really, it's a very, very useless idea, but I wanted to render HTML to Markdown. So no one ever needs this. You always want to go in the other direction. It's a really stupid idea, but if you think about it, it is taking XML-looking stuff and rendering it to something that you can quickly see, oh yes, I recognize that, because I assume you all speak Markdown as well. And it was just complicated enough to have to deal with props. So before we get started into how this works, we need to talk about some definitions. So the reconciler is the core engine of React that figures out how to update the UI in response to changes to state and props. The host environment is the platform you're rendering to, like DOM or to the canvas or to the terminal. The host component refers to the platform-specific elements, like a div for DOM or a rect in Canvas. Host config is this configuration file that you give to the React reconciler to describe how it should interact with your target environment. An instance is an object that represents one UI element in your environment, like an HTML element in JavaScript. The container is the root of your entire rendered tree. It can be whatever you want, but that is what you're rendering to before you do other things with it. React is rendered in two phases. There's the update phase, where the reconciler walks through the JSX tree to determine what components to re-render, and the commit phase, where they actually make the minimal change. So how do we build a React renderer? Well, we start with using this library called React Reconciler. It's sort of maintained / documented by Facebook. They don't give it a lot of love, but it's really the only game in town if you want to do cool stuff with React. We need a render function that's going to take our JSX element and do something with it, whatever we want. And like I said, there's the host config that lets you tell the React reconciler how to handle changes. And unless you're building something as dumb as HTML to Markdown, maybe you can make some money from it. I don't know. So what does this look like in code? It's not as scary as it looks. We start with importing the React reconciler, and our host config, which we'll get to in a second. And then we create a reconciler with our host config. And then in our render function, we create whatever sort of container shape we want. It's totally arbitrary. And in TypeScript, it's all type safe, so that's pretty cool. And then we do this sort of scary thing of creating a root given our reconciler and our container. And then we call update container. And this is going to mutate our container, what's inside our container. And all that other stuff is for the craziness of React that you probably won't need if you're doing your own custom renderer, like strict mode and concurrent and blah, blah, blah. So now let's look at the host config. So the most important function in your host config is create instance. This is given a type, which is the JSX tag, and the props that you give to the tag. And it gives you back an instance. Remember, an instance is one type of thing in your target environment. So in DOM, that would look something like this, where we create a DOM element. We copy over the props that we determine that we want to support. And we set those props on the element, and we return the element. So our instance is a DOM element. In my Markdown thing, I just created an object to save the type and the children and make space for children. Then we've got create text instance, which if you know DOM, you understand that there's different types of elements, and one of them is text, and that's the bit between the tags. And that has an exact equivalent in DOM, and in mine, I just created a thing and said, hey, this is a text element. And then there's ways to manipulate stuff. So there's like appending the first child to the container. This is in DOM. Like, so much of this is basically copying what DOM does, but it lets you do other cool things later. So for mine, I'm just pushing a child onto the container, children. And then there's append initial child, and this is not given the container, this is given one of your nodes, and this again is the exact same in DOM. And in mine, it's a little bit more complicated because if it's a string component, then do nothing. But if it's if the type of the child is a string, then create a text element. Otherwise, just push and set the parent in case we want to like traverse back up the tree. And the append child is the exact same because it's the same thing. And here we have two important functions for the different phases of the render. So in the prepare phase, you're given the instance of your whatever it is that you're rendering to, the type of the component and the different props, and you return an update payload that is then given to the commit. And it's totally up to you what you want to do with these values. And there are just a couple more parts of the host config that I haven't shown you. They are for doing the crazy things that React is capable of doing. All this hydration and suspense and concurrency and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so now it's time for some fun. Let's see if we can choose content. Alrighty. So, okay, don't know what that was. So this is an example of my HTML to Markdown render. I've got HTML over here, and I can add something here, and when I hit save, it updates my Markdown. But fine, whatever, that's kind of cool. But like to show that this really is React, we can add something like a typical counter, and here we can print out the count. And you can see that it's updating once per second. So like we can do anything we want with state and effects and all the powers that you know what to do with React. You can fetch stuff, whatever. And then I implemented some other stuff like an unordered list. Oops. And if I wanted to make that ordered, it does that too. And then I had some fun with vibe coding, and I made it do tables too, which is kind of cool. But you can see and what it's doing here is it's going through the tree, the JSX tree, and it's building up this JSON structure, and then I'm just going through my JSON structure recursively, and for ULs, I'm putting the dash, and for OLs, I'm doing a counter. So pretty not that crazy stuff. Okay, so this is a React talk, right? So I figure we need some props. These are composable. I thought What if I could render to IoT devices? What if I could render to the real world? Like, what? So let's see how that works. So just triple check that this is running like it's supposed to be. It was not. So what if in my room called React Alicante stage, I had a bulb that took an on prop but wait, there's more. So, that's pretty cool. And what if I could maintain that state with like a React use state? Oops. And I could set this to on. Oops. On. Okay, so now it's off, but like in your typical React demo, right, you've got your counter where you're pressing the button and the number's going up and whatnot. It'd be cool if we could have like a button, right? But we don't have a button. But if you think about it, our HTML buttons are all just like skeuomorphic suggestions of the real world buttons. So like, what if we had a button in the real world, like say this, that I could click sometimes lights are lights. So cool. So like, let's have like a use effect or something. So what if we had like an interval that would make them blink? 1 second is too fast. Let's do 2, and then we can get our button here, and I hit save. And now they blink. So it's just React state. We're maintaining state in the same way that we know how to use React. Okay, what else can we do? So these are, okay, we're going to stop the blinking. So these are smart lights, and they can do colors. What can we do with React state that would be interesting with colors? Well, if you know me at all, you might know that I'm a big fan of state machines, and especially xstate, the library. So I thought, what if we could build a traffic light as a state machine? Well, we can use our nice xstate visual editor here, and we can add a state called red, and that would transition to green, and that would transition to yellow, and then that would eventually go back to red. Okay, fine. But what are these events? Well, really, we don't need to wait for an event. We just want to, like, after, let me say, 3 seconds, we'll go there, and then we'll let traffic flow for another 3 seconds. And then we'll come back here, and how long should we give people to break? Maybe 2 seconds. Okay, so I've built this little traffic light state machine. Neat. So if I go over to my room here, I can just with xstate, with React xstate, I can use machine with my traffic machine, and this is going to give me a state, and here I can set my color to state.value. Let's do them both. It's more exciting. And then if I leave them on all the time, And I hit save and we pray a little bit. That's on, but it's not, my state machine didn't get saved. There. Red, green. So my point is, I'm not to go out and build traffic lights. My point here is all the state management solutions and libraries and everything that you know about from building applications in React can be rendered to whatever, the real world. Like, you want to do use query, or React query, or Redux even? It's possible. Okay, so one last thing. I thought, okay, how else can we connect this to the real world? And I was like, well, I've already done the button thing. And I thought, well, my laptop has, my laptop has a microphone. And I thought, what if I wrote a use noise hook? And then here set the brightness to the noise, like so. Let's close this. And so I went and hit save. Now, help me out here. Isn't that cool? Okay, so that's the end of the demo, but I think I've made my point that you can render to crazy things. So let's figure out what we're doing here. Stop mirroring. Extend. So we survived demo time. Cool. Okay, so so this isn't just about fun and games. This is, I want to tell you about how we're actually using this technology at my company. I work for a company called Attio. We are building the next generation of CRM. CRM is Custom Relations Management. It's like, think Salesforce, but it doesn't suck. And my job at Attio is to build an ecosystem API for third parties to write code that runs in Attio. And that is a really complicated thing to accomplish, because you can't just take someone's third-party JavaScript and like eval it in your web app, because that's horribly insecure. They've got access to cookies and your fetch and any of your own internal APIs. So we had to come up with a way to allow third-party code to run securely, but also like render UI in our web app. And so smarter people than I did that at Attio. And what we do is we have an iframe that fetches from a different domain, so it doesn't have any of the same cookies. And in that iframe, we have a Rust WASM JavaScript runtime. Like, think a little mini version of Node that we run in the browser, and it only has the capabilities that we choose to give it. So it doesn't have window, it doesn't have fetch, it doesn't have anything. It's just what we give it. And what we give it, like, it's totally up to us. We give an SDK for ways to communicate with the web app. And we really wanted a way for people to build UI that, like I said, that would render inside. And so we thought, well, what do people know how to build UI in? And we thought, well, React. So what if we could build a React thing that would render what the app gave us into something that we could serialize out of the iframe back to the web app, and then we could render our UI. So it looks a little bit something like this. This is the kind of SDK that we provide. To any React developer, this will look familiar. We give you a form component with an onSubmit callback and a combo box input. and a rich text input, and a submit button. This, by the way, is real and open source at that address. And so this renders, like our components that we give render to our own little custom components. Like I had room and bulb and things. This renders, it's more or less one-to-one like that, but not entirely. And then we send this back over the wire, and then we can render this in our beautiful UI. We also do things like, it's not just forms, we do little widgets. So you can, an app can go and fetch like the stock price of a company or something, and then render it inside of our UI. So we've got these components that are pretty straightforward. And again, it's just React. Like this is, you know what this does. You can read this code. And then this gets transformed into this, which gets transformed into our nice UI. The other nice thing about using React, obviously, is that there's a million developers that speak it, but guess what the LLMs are really good at? What I want to leave you with today is curiosity. What can you think to render to? Like you already have this React superpower to control state over time and do cool things, but like, what could you render to? We had a previous talk that talked about a weird label printer DSL. Like, that's a great example. You could render to a 3D printer. Imagine having nice composable things that you can, put together to build a 3D object. Or you could position a drone, or you could do cooler things than this with smart lights. Or, I don't know, configure a cloud database or prompt an LLM, whatever. Anything that's inherently declarative and sort of tree-shaped is a great target to render to. So let's light up the lights.